right, so let's look at chapter 15 and see if we can get some information out of there. So it says after this, after what? The reunion, the reconciliation between David and Absalom. Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. Why would he do that?
To make a big splash.
Gets attention, makes a big splash. It shows, makes him look important, doesn't it? It's a way to get attention. It also shows that he's free to move about. He's not being, there's no house arrest going on any longer or anything that would have happened previously. Now, Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way of the gate. The way of the gate would be where anyone would go for any sort of legal counsel, or if a decision needed to be made about anything, you go to the gate, and the elders of the gate, the judges of the time, would be there, and they would give you the decision, and it was accepted that that was the decision, the final decision, and there were some that would take it on to the king, and others would just take that information. So he goes where all the decision making is happening, and he stands there. And so it was that whenever anyone who had a lawsuit would come to the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him and say, "Hey, what city are you from?" And he would say, "Oh, your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel." So he's pretending this personal interest. "Hey, how are you? How's it going? Where are you from? What's going on?" You have this handsome man standing there, sort of expressing personal interest in you. People are attracted to that. It's a good politician, actually, is what he's, coming across at. Then Absalom would say to him, "Hey, look, your case is good and right, but there's no deputy of the king to hear you. So, hey, you've got a great case. That is just and right. It's too bad there's nobody from the king here to hear what's going on." Moreover, Absalom would say, "Oh, that I were made a judge in the land, and everyone who has a suit or a cause would come to me, then I would be sure to give him justice." Now, look, he's asking for judgeship, not kingship at this point. So if anyone should go to the king and say, "Look what Absalom's doing," he's not usurping the throne, is he? He's just saying, "Hey, I could be a judge in the land." And so it was that whenever anyone came near to bow down, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. So don't bow down to me. Come on, get up. Let's hug. We're friends here. And in this matter, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So that behavior is well received. Right? Whether or not the elders are there, whether Absalom has run them off. Absalom seems to assume that he is next in line for the throne, whether his little procession of 50 horses and all of that, or 50 runners and the horses, and who knows how it's all playing out. All we know is that he is stepping in that position. He has no judgeship, he has no authority, but he's taking it, and he's setting it up for himself. Now, it came to pass after 40 years. All right, that cannot possibly be correct, because David only rules and reigns for 40 years. Now, we know Absalom was born son number 3. He was born in Hebron during that 7-year period that David is in Hebron and rules and reigns before all the tribes come together and come to Jerusalem. But 40 years is the totality of David's reign. This is a typo mistake. If you go back and look at some of the ancient manuscripts, it's really clear that it was supposed to be 4, but there was a 0 put on the end of it. But there's no possible way it could be 40. It makes absolutely no sense. The only other thing that people have said to try and describe what happened here is they're saying, well, maybe Absalom was 40. That doesn't make any sense either. He wouldn't have been there. So it's a typo, and it should have been 4 instead of 40. And he says, "Please, let me go to Hebron and pay the vow which I made to the Lord. For your servant took a vow when I dwelt in Geshur in Syria, saying, if the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord." So where was Absalom born?
In Hebron.
In Hebron. That's where did David first rule and reign? In Hebron. Where was the capital of Judah at that time? In Hebron. So it's an important city, to David. It's also become an important city to Absalom. And so he says, I made a vow when I was in Geshur that I would come back and sacrifice to the Lord, and it's called a votive sacrifice. I made a vow, and I need to go to Hebron and make serve the Lord there. So the king says to him in verse 9, go in peace. So he arose and he went to Hebron. Now what we are going to find out is that go in peace are the last words that David is ever going to speak to Absalom, which is kind of ironic. They're going to be his last words. So then Absalom sent spies throughout all of the tribes of Israel, saying, hey, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron. What is he saying when he says Absalom reigns in Hebron?
He's king.
He's king in Hebron. So what is he attempting to do? Take over the throne. And keep in mind that not only take over the throne, but if Absalom comes in and takes over the throne, what would happen to David? David would be killed. So if Absalom comes in, David would be killed, and he's trying to attempt to take the throne, a coup, trying to attempt to take the throne away from his father. So as soon as you hear the trumpet, say Absalom reigns in Hebron. And when with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently, and they didn't know anything. So he invites 200 people to go down with him to Hebron. They're going to do that friendship dinner thing where they make a sacrifice and everybody participates in it. And so, but these guys don't really know anything that's going on. They don't know that Absalom is attempting to do the coup. They simply know that they're going with Absalom as he's feigning this spiritual thing. Yeah.
He's been winning them over all this time.
Yep, many of them like him, absolutely. So Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifice. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people with Absalom continually increased in number. So this Ahithophel, many people believe that this is the one that, if you go back a few chapters and to the beginning of Bathsheba, you'll see that Ahithophel is mentioned as a grandfather to Bathsheba. The question is this the same man? We really don't know. There's no way. He's never in the story ever said to be the grandfather of Bathsheba, but that in itself would not be unusual because Bathsheba is not important enough to be concerned about who her grandfather is. What we do know is that this Ahithophel for sure is a trusted counselor of David, someone that he knows very well. And Absalom is now pulling him in to come on his side. If it is Bathsheba's grandfather, can you see why he would go to Absalom over David? The hard feelings about how Bathsheba and David got together and what happened, it would make sense that he would do that if he is the same Ahithophel. So now we're going to see in verse 13, a messenger came to David, and it says, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. So Absalom's getting them in. David, how do you think David feels when he hears that?
Grieved. Yeah, and betrayed. And finally forgave him and reconciled.
And that was what he was waiting for, right? Gave him the freedom of movement, and he could go about and do what it is. Now, Deuteronomy 21 tells us that if you have a rebellious son, what's to happen to him? He was to be stoned, taken outside of the village and to be stoned. So David knows, once again, what the law says, what righteous judgment is, and that doesn't come into play. 14, so David said to all of his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, "Arise, let us flee, or we shall not escape with Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, strike the city with the edge of the sword." So he has no time to prepare, no time to raise up his army, no time. He feels that he has no time to make this. Also, there may very well have been a point in David's life where he doesn't want to go against Absalom. He doesn't want there to be a bloodbath. And it's better to run, to flee the city, than it is to orchestrate a military battle against Absalom. And the king's servant said to the king, "We are your servants. We're ready to do whatever the Lord the king commands." Then the king went out with all of his household after him. But the king left 10 women, concubines, to keep the house. Why would he leave 10 concubines? This is part of his little harem. Are these Saul's concubines that he has? Are these concubines he's added? We're not told. But we do know that he believes that they are safe, because who thinks that Absalom is going to come in and bother the harem of the king at this point? And he obviously thinks that they're not in any danger.
They aren't as wise.
They aren't the important ones. Yeah. And so he leaves the 10 of them there. And the king went out with all the people after him, and he stopped at the outskirts of town. Then all of his servants passed before him, and all the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all of the Gittites, 600 men who had followed him from Gath, passed before the king. So these are Philistines. Gath is where Goliath was from. Gath is where David had gone and fled when he needed to flee. So Gath is a Philistine city. These 600 men come from that area. These are Philistines who have followed David. And the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why are you going with us? Return and remain with the king." Who's he talking about when he says the king? David is talking to him. "Why are you going? Return and stay with..." He's talking about Absalom. "For you are a foreigner and also an exile from your own place. You don't need to get involved in this fight. This is not your fight. In fact, you only came yesterday." Bad timing, right? "Should I make you wander up and down with us today, since I do not know where I go? Return and take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you." So those 600 Philistines, you guys don't need to get in the middle of all of this. Why would he do that? Does he know that they're amazing military men and they would probably slaughter Absalom and his people? Does he? I mean, we really don't know.
He's saying take all 600 men and Ittai, or just Ittai?
He's saying return and take your brethren back.
So it's all 600?
All of the Philistines that are with you. And then he gives the blessing, "Mercy and truth be with you." So it's not being done in anger. He's not sending them off in anger. He's saying, "Hey, you guys don't need this fight. Go on." But Ittai said to the king and answered the king and said, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant will be." So their loyalty to David is strong. And David said to Ittai, "Go and cross over." So he accepts him in. To cross over, they're crossing over the Kidron River, the creek, the Kidron Brook, it's called here, and they're going to go over, and then it talks about going into the wilderness. They're going into the wilderness of Judah. They're attempting to flee from any damage that Absalom could do. Then Ittai the Gittite and all of his men and all of the little ones, or their family that was with them, crossed over that Kidron Brook. And all of the country wept with a loud voice, and all of the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all of the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness of Judah. So they're running. There was Zadok also, and all of the Levites with him. What are they doing? They're bearing the Ark of the Covenant. And they set down the Ark of the Covenant, and Abiathar went up until all of the people had finished crossing over from the city. So they're leaving Jerusalem, Abiathar with the Levites. had the Ark of the Covenant. Do you remember a story about going into battle with the Ark of the Covenant? What was the story? It became a what?
Tilted and people tried to prop it back up.
That's another part. That's another story of the Ark of the Covenant.
Became a.
The Philistines capture it because they try and call it out and make it what? A good luck
Yeah.
piece. To say if we have this in our battle, this is going to keep us safe. Remember, we discussed the fact that they thought God lived in that box. So if they could move that box around, then God was with them. And so David is, so Zadok and all of the Levites have that Ark of the Covenant, and they're leaving Jerusalem. And the king says to Zadok, carry the Ark of God back into the city. Take it back. We don't need to have it with us. That's not what we need. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and show me both it and his dwelling place. So David is showing that he learned that lesson, which is you don't need the Ark of the Covenant. Take it back. If God wants me to come back into the city, I'll come back and see it again. But just take it back. But if he says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am, let him do to me as seems good to him. So David's talking about God. If God says, hey, you're done, David, then why would I fight it?
Right.
Why would I fight what God seems good to him? And the king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer, another word for a prophet? Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So they're going out into the west bank of the Jordan, and he says, I'm just going to wait out here until you guys tell me what's going on. Therefore, Zadok and Abiathar carried the Ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. All right, so now we're going to see how David responds with all of his people going there. The ones that are coming out are now out. He has sent back the ones that need to go back. Now let's see what David does in verse 30.
Okay, they were carrying the ark
Yes.
on poles.
Yeah, with the priests of the Levites.
2 men.
It would normally take 4.
Yeah, that's what. Okay.
Yeah, and so they're back. So David went up, verse 30, by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went up, and he had his head covered, and he went barefoot. Signs of mourning. Signs of mourning over what's going on. Mourning because of the loss of Jerusalem, mourning because of the loss of his son, mourning because of all that has gone on. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they went up. Then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel, is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. David knows he's a wise man. And he says, let him not speak truth. Let him not give anything to Absalom. Let it be all foolishness. Now it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshipped God. There was Hushai the Archite, doesn't sound right, coming up to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. Why would David be going to the top of the mountain?
Military advantage.
Because it says that is where he is going to worship God. If you remember, before the temple came, oftentimes worship occurred at the high places. That was allowed and encouraged at that time. Later on, we saw in Ezekiel that the people will take that and it becomes a place for idols and a lot of other things. But for now, it's where you could go to worship God up in the high places.
So there was probably an altar up there?
There may have been an altar up there. Whatever the situation was, you go to the highest spot, and that says that is where David worshipped God. And he meets this man. And David says, if you go with me, then you will become a burden to me. So evidently, there's a couple of options. 1, this guy's an older man. 2, he's not in the greatest of health. I don't know. For whatever reason, having you with me is not going to be an advantage. You are going to become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, hey, I will be your servant, O king. Look how David is addressing Absalom. As I was your father's servant previously. I mean, he is accepting defeat. David is. Calling Absalom king, saying, oh, I was your father's servant before, so I will now also be your servant. Well, if you say that, then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me. So he's sending him back and saying, you can counteract whatever Ahithophel is saying, but you can also then come and give me information. So far he's told the priests to go back and wait and then let me know what's going on. And now he's telling this servant the same thing. That's how David's going to get his information. He's sending spies back into Jerusalem to find out what's going on.
Well, a little bit before, David mourning over Jerusalem
Yes.
reminds us of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
When
the
he
same.
mourns, yep, over
Grieving
Jerusalem.
over, Jerusalem's future.
Right. And verse 35, and do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. So his little spy ring is getting cemented into place. Indeed, they have there with them their two sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son. And by them you shall send me everything that you hear. So Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. All right, so we can go ahead and turn that off now. This is going to set up into motion